Thank you so much. I've been here at Benedictine now for 13 whole months. So it's been a wild ride here. It's a fantastic place. And we have had a banner year in education discussion here. We've had a symposium. Jeremy's been here, I don't know, 2 or 3, 4 times this year. It's such a gift every time he's here. And looking at his bio, I keep thinking, how did we not meet sooner? I've been a huge fan of CLT, brought it to a high school where I was a principal. We helped pilot the 3 to 6 CLT 3 to 6 at a school I was at prior to coming to Benedictine. I'm such a fan of the work that Jeremy has done. So Jeremy Wayne Tate is the founder and CEO, as you may, of the Classical Learning Test and a national leader in the revival of classical education. He's been featured in Fox News, MSNBC, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Inside Higher Ed, and the New York Times. Prior to founding the CLT, Jeremy served as the director of college counseling at Mount DeSales Academy in Catonsville, Maryland. He received his Bachelor of Science in Secondary Education from Louisiana State University and a Master's in Religious Studies from Reformed Theological Seminary. Jeremy and his wife, Erin, reside in Annapolis, Maryland with their 6 children. You can find him on all of the great social media pages, but I highly recommend the Anchored podcast for CLT. It's one of my favorites. He's been doing great work there with some of his colleagues, including Short and Schwab. I can't say enough about the great conversations that Jeremy and I have had, and the work that he does in education and his team that he's brought together are great things, and I cannot wait to hear what he has to share with us today. Jeremy, welcome to the podium.
All right, good morning. Great to be with you this morning. Sorry to be redundant. If you were at ICLE, I started off with this at ICLE, but Benedictine College is the #1 destination for CLT test takers. So if you're not already, send your kiddos to Benedictine, your students. It's an amazing place. And I don't know of any other place. I've probably been to 100 campuses since starting CLT. I don't know of another place that lives out Christian hospitality like Benedictine College. We were chatting late last night. I say late because it was about 8:30, and I've got 6 kids and I'm 43 now, so I've totally become my dad. Felt kind of late. But we were chatting, and I wasn't really thinking about it, but I just kind of said out loud, I said, if America has a future, it's going to be because of places like Benedictine College. And Dr. Vance said, you should put that in your talk. And I should put that in the talk. That's a good thing. And then I got home and I was thinking about it at the hotel. I said, I should put that in the beginning of the talk. That may be the best thing I have in store. That's a pretty good line. So it may be all downhill from here. This may be the high point, but I really do. I think the world of this place. I'm a big fan of J.D. Vance as well, but I think that the work of this Vance is even more important. And so thank you, Dr. Vance, for the work that you're doing and putting this on. So I want to start off with a couple of stories, and you may be wondering as you're hearing these, how did these possibly relate? And we will land the plane eventually, I promise. So I started teaching right out of college. I went to Louisiana State University for my undergrad, and in 2004, got married as soon as my mother-in-law said we were allowed to get married. And right after that, we went to New York City. My wife did Teach for America, and I did Urban Teachers at Progress High School in Brooklyn, New York. In the 3 years I taught, I didn't have a single student who lived with married biological parents. It was a community that was in a lot of suffering in so many ways. And my first week of school, and it had to maybe the second day, as a young man. His name was Danny Santiago. We became close. I think he'd be fine with me using his name. And there's no AC in this part of the building. And it was a very, very hot day in late August. And Danny takes off his shirt in class. And they had told me in the training, whatever you do, you never leave the classroom. So I'm like, all right, I'm like, Danny, you gotta put your shirt back on. And he's like, he's like, F you is what he says. It's hot as you know what. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I really need you to, put your shirt back on. I'm like 4 years older. I'm like 22. He's 18. The whole thing's weird, right? And so then I'm like, all right, I'm gonna hit the little emergency, call an administrator bell that they told me about. So I hit that. And clearly there's no receptivity happening. It's broken. Been broken for years. The teachers who have been there knows nobody ever comes, right? So I just teach with Danny right there, with his shirt off, just sweating on his desk after getting cussed out, right? It's kind of my my introduction, to teaching in New York City in 2004. But Danny had been profoundly wronged, by an education system that just kind of pushed him along. He came from a single single parent home, and had a reading level of probably second or third grade. I think he was actually probably I think he had it going on, but just had received very, very poor education. Now, this was 2004. If you remember the 2004 election, John Kerry and George Bush. You think back 20 years ago, there couldn't have been anything further, from Danny's mind. And I hope something changed, right? But if the goal here, if part of what we want our education to do is for people to participate in a self-governing democratic republic, that has to be one of the fruits of the education that we're giving students. I want to kind of compare this story of Danny with another story. In some ways, a very similar story. So again, Danny, his mother had immigrated here from Puerto Rico. My wife's great-grandmother also immigrated from Puerto Rico in 1938 with her 3 kids. She came as a single mom in 1938, didn't know the language, had left an alcoholic husband in Puerto Rico, came here by herself, and within a year had a complete mental breakdown and lost custody of the kids completely. And the kids all came into a Catholic orphanage in Brooklyn, New York in 1939. They stayed there for 3 or 4 years. And then they all stayed at the school part of this orphanage all the way through 12th grade. All 3 of these women, and I know them well, Esther, Nelita, and Anne, some of the most refined, eloquent, winsome, well-read. Their handwriting, their cursive is amazingly beautiful. None of them went to college, deeply involved in local politics and national politics. The life they're living now as 85-year-old women is a fruit of a profoundly Catholic education that they received in the 1940s. So part of what I want to communicate today is that, this is one and the same problem. Recovering authentically Catholic schools and saving America, right? Saving our self-governing democratic republic that Dr. George spoke about so eloquently last night. So what I want to do first here is share with you kind of the story of Catholic education in America. I'm going to be drawing heavily, and I got permission for this, from Michael Ortner and Kimberly Begg's new book. If you haven't read it yet, it's because it's not out yet. The book is the Catholic School Playbook. Raise your hand if you know those names, Michael Ortner and Kimberly Begg. Michael is a dear friend. He's he's kind of my CEO mentor at CLT. We talk actually several times a week, and he has a huge heart for recovering authentically Catholic education. And I'm so excited for this book to come out. So I'm going to be especially drawing from some in the first chapter here. So America's first Catholic schools. This is incredible. I didn't know this really until I read the book and then started reading up about this on my own as well. Go back to 1607, the Franciscan friars, 1607, in what is now St. Augustine, Florida, 1607. And this is 14 years before the Mayflower comes to Plymouth, right? So the Catholic education story goes back to the very, very beginning of kind of America's, the West coming to the New World here. In 1782, St. Mary's in Philadelphia became the first parochial school in the United States, creating a tradition of Catholic education that proliferated in the 1800s all the way to a peak in 1965. And this is really mind-blowing to me. In 1965, 50% of all Catholic children in America went to Catholic schools, right? And that represented over 10% of all children in America were in Catholic schools. They were at over 12,000 Catholic schools. And this was kind of the high water mark, 1965. And then a decline starts. And then a decline picks up. And for most of the past half century, we've been closing about 100 Catholic schools per year in the United States. All right, we've been closing about 100 Catholic schools per year in the United States. The number now is under 6,000 of total schools, total enrollment down from 5.7 million down to 1.6 million. We saw the first uptick in that number in COVID in 2021, just a little bit of an uptick. And I think that was partly, connected probably to the shutdowns, maybe partly due to the ideological stuff going on. I actually ran into an old friend during this time. He was super excited to tell me that he was sending his kids to Catholic school. And this was not the kind of guy you would think would tell you he's sending his kids to Catholic school. And I said, that's awesome. I said, I actually didn't even know you were Catholic. And he's like, oh, I'm not Catholic. He said, we just wanted a school that's not teaching all this new gender stuff to our kids, you know? And so simply being sane in the present moment, right, is like a major, major asset, you know, for Catholic schools to be drawn, you know, as so many of the public schools. And I don't mean, by the way, I mean, I taught in public schools. I went to public schools, the son of a public school teacher. I don't mean to be, you know, bashing the public school system, but it is not pretty. What I experienced there was, and they would call that kind of the good old days before things got bad. And so this also presents an incredible opportunity for Catholic schools if we can be distinct, right? If we can be distinct. So the story of Catholic education in America, I think it's in so many ways, you know, was an incredible success story. The academic, moral, and spiritual formation provided by Catholic schools was perceived to be at least equal to, but in many ways better than the free public schools. And this is incredible considering the deep-seated anti-Catholic sentiment. The quality of Catholic education was still undeniable. And, you know, although it is true that America was very much born, you know, as we all know, out of, you know, kind of Enlightenment political philosophy, that political philosophy itself was building on the Christian tradition and an understanding of the inherent dignity of the human person, right? And that we now have enshrined in America's founding documents. So by the numbers, despite long odds, the Catholic story of education in America has been a huge success story. So what exactly has changed? What exactly has changed? How are the Catholic schools different than they were back then? I told you about my wife and her family, what the schools were like for them. They were typically going to daily mass, reading Latin. They were reading from you know, the history of the church, right? Today, Latin is no longer required. It's often not taught at all. Classic texts from Augustine to Aquinas to Dante are no longer required reading and have largely disappeared. The schools have become simply less Catholic, both intellectually and spiritually as well. It's as if school leaders have forgotten what made attending Mass, learning Latin, and reading the classics, why that was all so important. The focus has shifted from the cultivation of virtue to college and career readiness, right? The exact same thing that Pearson and the College Board and ACT have been selling, you know, now for 3 or 4 decades, right? That many of our Catholic schools are kind of saying the same thing, right? What do? We're college prep, college and career readiness, right? I think the way that we recover is we be profoundly distinct. And we'll get into this just a bit more in a minute. But look, the news here, though, is not all bleak. I really do believe that we are in the beginning of an incredible recovery, an incredible renaissance. I think now is already begun. You know, there are stories like this. And maybe this goes back, you know, to the early 1970s, you know, the founding of places like Thomas Aquinas College. You know, Mother of Divine Grace. And now we've got more and more Catholic schools that are re-embracing the tradition of the church. And there have been some of these schools that have completely flipped their model. And many of you know of these kinds of schools like Sacred Heart Academy in Grand Rapids, Our Lady of Lourdes in Denver, Holy Rosary, Father Longdecker's School in Greenville, South Carolina. In so many of these cases, these schools have gone against every trend in the diocese or in the archdiocese. You know, and so many of the other schools are merging, are closing, or they're having to, you know, not hire new faculty when older faculty retires. These schools are often doubling. My own kiddos go to Divine Mercy Academy. Divine Mercy Academy came to occupy a space that had been occupied by a school for about 70 years. That school had dwindling enrollment. And finally, with about 20 kids left, it closed its doors. So there were empty classrooms And this was a new idea for a seriously, passionately Catholic school where students are going to daily mass, praying the Angelus, praying the Rosary together. And at a school that had closed because of lack of enrollment, they're now at 300 students. They're at waiting lists for many grades, right? And look, I've been for years, I've been in a men's group, a Bible study called Beer and Baron. I can explain the title of Beer and Baron. So we get together, we have a nice craft beer together, we have a bonfire, we pray together, and then we listen to a Bishop Baron homily together. And we've been doing this for like 15 years. It's before he was even a bishop. And until about 5 years ago, none of us, 20 guys in this group, none of us sent our kids to Catholic school. Zero. And the reason why is because the price point where we're at, of $17,000, $18,000, simply couldn't be justified given the similarities to the public school system, right? Same curriculum, same textbooks, same AP College Board infiltration at every level, right? And it simply made no sense. And then Chesterton came, Divine Mercy Academy came. And what those also did is they actually put pressure on a lot of the existing Catholic schools to kind of reconsider what they're doing. Those other schools have also made moves now to re-embrace their Catholic identity. I think there's 6 or 7 of us now in this group where none of us sent our kids to Catholic school. Now we're quickly approaching half of us are sending them, and it's because of this revitalization, right? And so to me, this is the only real way, we solve what has been an enrollment crisis, as well in so many of our Catholic schools. Now, it would be remiss to not speak for a little bit at least on the work that we're doing at CLT and kind of explain how this relates to this whole topic. I promise you it won't become just a CLT infomercial, but I do want to share this story with you because I think it captures part of what has happened in Catholic schools. I am a convert. I did not grow up Catholic. In fact, y'all are still kind of weird to me. I'm still kind of getting adjusted to it. I went to a very anti-Catholic Reformed seminary to become a pastor. And when I was in seminary, a buddy sent me a copy of Chesterton's Orthodoxy. So this is my friend from California. He says, dude, in every sentence. He's like, dude, you've got to read this right away. And like it just came out. And it came out in 1908, But like, dude, you got to read this. And so I read it, and I have the same experience that he had, like every page. But, Chesterton keeps taking these shots at Calvinism. Like, what are you doing? I loved it, but I hated it. And it was beginning of this process, which eventually led to me coming into full communion in the church in 2010. And when I came into the church, I had one thing on my mind. I wanted to get into a faithfully Catholic school. And the schools around me, there weren't a whole lot of options for really faithfully Catholic schools. And but one of the options was Mount DeSales Academy. I've been very impressed with the National Dominicans, learning about them, their passion and enthusiasm. Position came up for a college counselor. And so I moved there in 2014. And I was really surprised when I got to Mount DeSales to see the power and the influence of the college board. And the way that this first showed up, I got to know Sister Mary Bridget there. I saw her for the first time in 7 years last week at the Napa Institute. And, the other sister said she would read about a book a day, an incredible, prolific speed reader, reads over 100 pages an hour. And Sister Mary Bridget was bringing 2 electives to Mount DeSales. She was bringing a Christian apologetics, and she was bringing an introduction to philosophy. And we would talk together about the apologetics and what you're reading. I was like, you got to do Chesterton. We'd have so much fun. And then, like, no kids, very few, signed up for either the apologetics or the philosophy. And I was a college counselor, so I would talk to students like, hey, like, why do you want to take the philosophy class? Like, what's the point of life? What is human happiness? Why are we here? What is a good life? And they said, well, Mr. Tate, it's not any AP points. That was the number one response. It's not any AP points, all right? And this, for me, was a moment of like, what is going on? Like, here we've got what I already saw as an aggressively secular testing company in New York is somehow calling the shots of what our students are going to be taking at our Catholic school in Catonsville, Maryland. I thought this is really crazy. And so, our story was a very organic story. I was a college counselor. I was working with TAC. I was working with Christendom, working with Hillsdale. And it was a matter of calling and saying, hey, what would it mean to you if there was a college entrance exam that reflected a Hillsdale education? are reflected in TAC education. And this was the same time both the SAT and ACT were aligning with the Common Core standards. You may know this story. It wasn't just aligning with the Common Core, but of course the College Board hired the chief architect of the Common Core, David Coleman, to become the new CEO of the College Board. And I think since then they've gone in kind of an even more kind of crazy ideological direction, which I think really peaked with the adversity score in 2021. I mean, imagine thinking that you can quantify human suffering with a number, right? With a number that's going to give kids, you know, their advantage or disadvantage, you know, is absolutely kind of mind-boggling to me. But, you know, our experience has been an experience of, in many ways, kind of peeling back the layers of an onion and seeing that, you know, this is an organization that's been around now for 125 years. And it's like Dr. George is not in the room. He's been so encouraging, such a gift to know. Early days, I was begging and pleading and just being annoying. I'm a youngest child, so I can do the annoying thing and not going away. I'm like, I need 3 minutes of your time. They end up sitting down for half an hour, but something he said in that, he said that there's been no organization in American history that has driven the radical secularization of American education more than the College Board. So what has the Catholic response to that been? It's mostly been to just write checks to the College Board, right? A testing company that censors our entire intellectual tradition, right? The Western Catholic Christian tradition. And I'll get off this part in just a minute here. There was a student a couple years ago. She took a picture of her AP Human Geography test, and she posted it onto Instagram and Twitter and other social platforms, and it blew up all over the place. In the picture, it said this: it gave the students a table of nothing but the birth rates and the death rates for a number of countries around the world. And then the question was just this: based on the table, which country has made the most advances in female empowerment? And the answer was the country that had the lowest birth rate, right? Just shameless ideology being driven through, you know, but hey, national merit, PSAT, how do we back away from the College Board? So that is what we are trying to do, is say, you know what, to reestablish Catholic Christian education, this is one of the main levers, right? As we talked to Dr. George and others, there's kind of 4 main levers to reclaiming authentically Catholic schools, right? And again, the reason I'm talking about authentically Catholic schools is this solves the civics problem, right? It's not enough to just add a civics class. I appreciate the governors who want to do that, right? But self-government is a matter of the heart, right? It's a matter of being virtuous. It is an incredibly rare moment in human history when a group of people are capable of self-government. It is absolutely the exception, not the norm, right? But, you know, I think given the Puritan tradition of America's founders, people who had incredible self-control, moral discipline, this is the kind of government that we set up. But it's very clear, right? Ben Franklin, you know, keep it if you can. Keep the Democratic Republic if you can. But what does it take, right? John Adams, it takes a virtuous and religious electorate to do so, right? And so the very best thing for the future of American civic life, the very best thing for the future of our democratic republic, I believe, is recovering faithfully distinct, vibrant Catholic schools. So a couple more points here in this story with the recovery. What I love about where we're at right now is that there's a blueprint for how this has already been done. You know, we mentioned Sacred Heart Academy, we mentioned Our Lady of Lourdes, St. Jerome, some of these schools. But the common thread in so many of these, and I know there's a lot we can debate about the word classical, how loaded is it, right? Should we use that word? Is that the tradition of the church, right? But what I love about so many of these schools is that they've all done one thing that I think that we can all agree on for sure, and that they put the Eucharist back at the very center of the life and focus of the school, doing what schools like the Heights have done for a long, long time, right? At least providing or having everyone attend daily mass. This is what they've done at so many of these schools. I think this is what parents, I mean, it sounds pretty wild, right? If a school is used to like once a month to saying that we're going to go once a week, and then in 2 years, we're going to go every day, right? But if we really believe that this is the source and summit of the Christian faith, in some ways it's crazy to do anything else as well. In some ways it communicates a lack of belief, right, in this. And there's no 30 minutes that any class can do that has more teaching power than daily mass. I want to encourage you, and I know it's not, let's get there September 1st, but to have a roadmap to get there over a period of a number of years. And again, I think this is the main thing that also solves the civics problem. So going back to these kind of stories in the beginning, going back to Danny, going back to my wife's great aunts, and to her great grandmother and grandmother, let's provide once again. And what I love about this story is, this was the kind of Catholic education that was being given to an immigrant family in poverty, in the worst possible conditions, with a mom, in a mental institution, and a dad out of the picture as an alcoholic in Puerto Rico. And in the 1930s and 40s, we gave that family, we gave those children an incredible life-shaping and life-altering Catholic formation. And there's no reason we can't do it again. So thank you for having me, Dr. Vance. Thank you for putting this on. Happy to do some Q&A.